Okay, well, we're not going to go through that again. I am sorry that we missed our intro, but we're going to just jump on in because the audience is getting squirmy. Okay, so a review. So we, in our last lesson, John instituted the Lord's Supper and had a bunch of encouraging words for his disciples. And he told them that there were many dwelling places for them in his house. And he was going to go and leave them and prepare a place for them. And they didn't quite understand what all this meant. And he also told them that he was going to send the Holy Spirit so that whatever they asked in his name, uh, God would do what they asked. He said he left his peace with them, and he talked about he was the vine and they were the branches. And we spoke a lot about this last time. And I said our job is to just stay attached to the vine, stay attached to Jesus, and everything else is going to be fine. He called his disciples friends. Now this is super important because God is Lord, Master, King. Jesus is his son, also Lord, Master, and King. And he says, hey, I'm Lord, I'm Master, I'm King, I'm God, but you are my friend. And I love you. And I want you to love your fellow disciples and fellow Christians like I loved you. You're not just a slave and master relationship. We are brothers and friends. And that was a big deal. And they understood, I think, that how big of a deal this was. He said he was going to send his Holy Spirit. He told them that he was about to be killed, and they didn't understand this. They were like, we don't understand. How in the world are you going to be killed? But he says it's going to be like childbirth. It's going to be awful for a short time, but then I'm going to come back. And he prayed for them. And his prayer to God was in their hearing. They could hear the things he was praying. And he says, I do not ask on behalf of these alone, but for those also who believe in me through their word, that they may all be one, even as you, Father, are in me and I in you, that you also may be in us, so that the world may believe that you sent me. That's for us. He said, I'm saying all these things so that they can spread the gospel and we in present day can hear of these things so that we also can believe. And after this starting into new material, they left the Garden of Gethsemane, they went down the hill, they crossed the brook Kidron, and they entered the Garden of Gethsemane. They left the Mount of Olives, sorry, crossed the brook Kidron, and they went into the Garden of Gethsemane so Jesus could pray, and the disciples could watch over him. But what it really was Jesus knew that Judas would find them in the Garden of Gethsemane. So he's really waiting and praying, waiting for Judas to show up and betray him. He knows this is going to happen. So John's going to relate these events as an eyewitness. He was there, he saw them, and he's telling us, I saw this stuff. This is the disciple who was testifying these things and wrote these things, and we know that his testimony is true. He's telling this as a firsthand account. And as I've said before, I think he probably wrote this after Matthew, Mark, and Luke wrote their gospels. So he's going to include some stuff that they didn't include, but he's also not going to include everything because it's already been said. So he's going to tell it from his perspective. Now it's important that we understand that nothing in the other gospels contradict. Just because he left something out doesn't mean it's a contradiction. It means that he was telling the story from a certain point of view, and he knew that those other details had already been covered. And of course, we all understand that the four Gospels are all inspired by the Holy Spirit. Four different accounts of the same events from different perspectives, maybe, so that we can understand what happened. So now we get into chapter 18, verse 1. When Jesus had spoken these words, he went forth with his disciples over the ravine of the Kidron, where there was a garden in which he entered with his disciples. Now Judas also, when he was betraying him, knew the place, for Jesus had often met them there with his disciples. Judas then, having received the Roman cohort and officers from the chief priests and the Pharisees, came there with lanterns and torches and weapons. He knew what was going to happen. He knew where to find Jesus. So why did they need Judas? Why did they need Judas? Well, Judas would know where Jesus was, and Judas would know what he looked like, what he was wearing, and all of that. And at night, if you think about it, it made it a whole lot simpler for them to go and grab Jesus because Judas was there. Judas was key to their plan because this way also, if you think about it, this way there wasn't a big commotion because there was a lot of people in Jerusalem. There was a big feast happening. They wanted to make this quick and dirty kind of thing. So they got him at night. They got him in the garden. He was outside the city gates. They could just nab him. And so that's what they did. And when the guards show up and the people coming to arrest him show up, he walks up to him and he says, "Who are you looking for?" And they say, "We're looking for Jesus of Nazareth." And he says, "I am he." Now this is again this he is using the same Greek words as was in the Greek Old Testament to say, "I am who I am," like Moses was told by God in the burning bush. God said, "I am who I am," and Jesus is using these same words, and he's saying, "I am he." Jesus answered, "I told you that I am he, so that if you seek me, let these go their way, to fulfill the words which he spoke. Of those whom he has given me, I have lost not one." And you're like, "Well, where did that come from? I don't remember that in the Old Testament." And he said, No, that's what I said. And he said this right on the shores of the Sea of Galilee when he was praying. He said, "I have come down from heaven not to do my own will, but the will of him who sent me. This is the will of him who sent me, that all that he has given me, I lose nothing, but raise it up on the last day." So the disciples he had 12 disciples. He knew all along that Judas wasn't really his disciple. Judas was going to betray him. He knew what kind of person Judas was. But the other 11, he didn't lose any of them. "I'm not going to lose these guys." So he's saying to the guard, "I'm here. You found me. Let these other guys leave." But now Simon Peter, he's like, "Wait a second. I'm not going to let this happen." So he pulls out a sword and he drew and struck the high priest's slave and cut off his ear. And the slave's name was Malchus. And Jesus tells him, "Hey, put your sword away. This is what I've come to do. I've come to be crucified. Don't try to stop it." Okay, there's more to the story. This is I find this very fascinating, and I don't quite understand it. Jesus had told Peter to bring the sword. What? Uh, at the Last Supper, Luke records, he says, "Whoever has no sword is to sell his coat and buy one." And Peter's like, "Hey, there's 2 swords here." And Jesus says, "Okay, that'll be enough." So Jesus told him to take the sword. Now, Peter attacked Malchus to free Jesus. That's another thing we find in the book of Mark. They laid hands on him and seized him. That's Jesus. But one of those who stood by drew a sword. That's Peter. And struck the slave of the high priest and cut off his ear. Now, you say, why in the world was he trying to cut off his ear? He wasn't. He wasn't trying to cut off his ear. He was trying to chop that guy's head off. And he missed. He just got his ear, right? I mean, think about it. He didn't actually, like in the video, it sounds like he grabbed his ear and tried to saw it off. No, he was trying to kill this guy. He was trying to free Jesus. And John doesn't tell us that Jesus went and touched his ear and healed him. And that's, we hear of that in Luke. So the question comes up, of all the people of this band of robbers that comes up, we don't get anybody's name except Malchus. So the question comes up, did Malchus become a Christian? Is that why John included him? We don't know. I think it's a great thing to think, but we don't know. The scriptures don't say. There's not later on a letter from Malchus saying, "Yeah, I converted to the gospel because he healed me." We don't know, but it makes a good story. But the scriptures doesn't tell us if Malchus became a Christian. I'd like to believe that, but again, the scriptures don't tell us. Now, Jesus is going to get arrested, and he's going to get tried by 6 different courts, and I'll put that courts in quotes. He's going to come before Annas, Caiaphas, then he's going to go before the Sanhedrin, he's going to go to Pilate, then he's going to go to Herod, and then he's going to go back to Pilate. Now, John doesn't tell us all the details. He doesn't tell us about the going before the Sanhedrin and going before Pilate, going before Herod, I mean. He just tells us about going to Pilate. And everything lines up, but John just didn't talk about him leaving Pilate and going to Herod and coming back to Pilate. Okay, so chapter 18, verse 19, the high priest then questioned Jesus about his disciples and about his teaching. And Jesus said, I've spoken openly. Jesus wasn't hiding anything. He never hid anything. This wasn't a secret. Jesus was coming to declare his deity to the world and to save them from their sins. And they didn't want to hear it. The Sanhedrin did not want to hear it. The high priest didn't want to hear it. The Pharisees didn't want to hear it. Okay, so now as this is happening and Jesus is getting questioned by Annas, John follows them in. Now, John had some connections that the high priest knew who he was. If you think about it, that's a pretty big deal. John must not have been just some regular guy if he could walk up to the high priest's house at night and get in. And the servant girl at the gate to his house knew him by sight to let him in. So he gets in, and then he comes back and he uses his connection to say, hey, let this guy in, Peter. So we don't know all of the details about how John knew that, but John could get in. Okay, so then we have 3 denials. The slave girl keeps the door says, are you not also one of this man's disciples, are you? And he says, I am not. Are you not one of these disciples also? It sounds like that she knew John was one of Jesus's disciples. It sounds like John wasn't trying to hide anything. It says something maybe about John's faith. John wasn't denying Christ. John's like, I'm one of his followers. Can I please come in and watch what's happening? Peter was scared. Peter had also tried to murder a guy just a few minutes earlier, but Peter was scared. And he didn't know how to do this. I want to defend Peter a little bit. Peter didn't understand what just happened. Peter thought that Jesus was going to be king, and he didn't understand why Jesus was letting these people take him when he was Lord and the Messiah. So he's confused. He doesn't know what to do. Jesus says, you can't protect me. Don't protect me. Peter's confused. So he's scared, and so he denies Jesus. He makes a mistake. He sins. He's makes the wrong judgment call. Now, this trial and stuff is going on, and the guards and all this band of people are standing around the fire pit. And Peter's cold. Peter goes up to there, and he's warming himself. And one of the other guys says, hey, aren't you also one of his disciples? And he says he's not. And then one of the slaves of the high priest, one of Malchus's relatives, the guy he just tried to murder or kill in self-defense of Jesus, says, hey, weren't you one of these guys' followers? And he said, no, I am not. And immediately a rooster crowed. Wow. Now, this is going to become important because next time we're going to talk about on the Sea of Galilee, and Jesus is going to ask Peter if he loves him 3 times, and it's kind of like to undo these 3 denials. Now, a little bit of architecture. Here's a model of what they think Annas' house looked like. So rich people in Jerusalem are going to have a big house, and their whole house and their yard is going to be surrounded by a wall. And instead of having one house and a room outside of it, what they have is a house that has doors into a common courtyard. So when you come in, what you do is you're coming in like through here. You're coming into the courtyard. And then there'll be the house proper, and all of these different doors will face into this courtyard. So when he got let into the gate, into the courtyard. And then they suppose that there would have been fire pits around here. And so this Roman cohort, the other guys that were there to arrest Jesus, they're all standing around. And these second and third denials are going to happen in this courtyard around the main house. I thought that was kind of interesting. The video does an okay job of showing that, but that's what the house might have looked like. And they've dug this stuff up in Jerusalem. Okay. Now, we read this earlier. He said, I spoke openly to the world, and I always taught in the synagogues and the temple. Moving down to verse 24. So Annas sent him bound to Caiaphas, the high priest. here's where I thought this was really interesting. Okay, so Annas, you can go in history, find the guy out. He's a real guy. He lived. Um, he was high priest from about 6 AD, from when Jesus was basically a little boy, up until 15 AD. And when the new Roman governor came in, Annas had done something that the Roman governor didn't like. So this Roman governor, Gratus, he deposed Annas. Well, how can you depose the high priest? And he says, "You're not the high priest anymore." Wait a second, I'm the high priest. I am per the Jewish law, I'm the high priest. And he said, "Nope, you're not." So Gratus deposed him and put this other guy, Ismail, in as high priest. Now it looks like that about every year he would elect, or he would appoint, not elect, a new high priest. And that's why in the text it says that Caiaphas was high priest that year, because Gratus had gone and basically only let him serve for about a year before something happened, and either he got tired of him and kicked him out, they did something he didn't like, or he just wanted to set up a system where the high priest wasn't this long-serving position. Even one of Annas' sons, Eleazar, was the high priest. And then Gratus made Caiaphas, the son-in-law of Annas, the new high priest. So basically every year this guy Gratus is just throwing out the high priest and getting a new guy. So Caiaphas, his name was Joseph, son of Caiaphas, but in scriptures he's just recorded as Caiaphas. He ended up being the high priest from about 18 to 36. So it looks like he was a little bit more politically astute. And this Gratus guy, he got he served this term and he left, and another guy came in, Pilate. Okay, so Pilate comes in and he's not too concerned about replacing the high priest every year, or Caiaphas knows how to grease the skids or whatever. So Caiaphas is going to be the high priest for a while. Okay. But through all of this, what I want you to understand is Annas is the guy pulling the strings. Because even after Caiaphas gets pulled out, Annas' other sons all served as high priests. So Annas is high priest? Well, not really. But all the Jews know to go talk to Annas. If you want, the guy with the real power is Annas. He's the guy behind the scenes, regardless of who has the political title of high priest. Annas is the guy pulling the strings. So that's why they went to Annas' house first. Okay. Then they led Jesus from Caiaphas to the praetorium, and it was early, and they themselves did not enter into the praetorium, so that they would not be defiled, but might eat the Passover. What is this? So if you are ritually unclean, you can't eat the Passover. Well, they didn't want to become ritually unclean. But let's look at what the laws actually said. The 10 Commandments actually said, you're not supposed to murder people. And they wanted to murder Jesus. So they don't care about the actual law. But they had come up with their own laws. They'd come up with their own laws to say, you can't go and go into a Gentile's house. There was no law. You go look at the law of Moses. There's no law in the law of Moses that says you can't go into a Gentile's house. It's not there. But they came up with their own laws. This guy, the school of Shammai, he made up these 18 edicts. And the goal of these 18 edicts was to separate Jew from Gentile. So they were more concerned about breaking their own laws than God's laws. Bunch of hypocrites. These guys were like, oh, well, we can't break our own law, but we'll break God's law on murdering people. That's no problem. I just think that's sad. I just really do. Okay, so he goes before Pilate. And I'll paraphrase this a little bit. Pilate says, what'd this guy do? And they're like, we wouldn't have brought him to you if he wasn't guilty. What? Is that how it's supposed to work? The police says, I arrested you. You must be guilty or I wouldn't have arrested you. That's not how it's supposed to work. And he says, well, then do what you want. Judge him according to your own law. And they're like, we're not allowed to execute people. You guys won't let us execute people. So Pilate's like, okay. Now, I don't think Pilate was uninformed. I think he probably knew what was going on in Jerusalem, and I think he probably had heard about Jesus in Nazareth. I mean, how could he have not heard about him when there was this triumphal entry just a few days ago where all these crowds of people gathered around and called him Hosanna? I'm sure he knew what was going on. And so he says, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And Jesus responds, and he's like, "Are you asking me this for yourself, or did somebody else ask you to say this?" Ooh, Jesus is putting him is showing that Pilate is kind of a tool in all of this. And he's like, "Hey, I'm not a Jew. Your own people, the chief priests, they're the ones that brought you here." And Jesus answers, he says, "Yes, I am a king, but I am not a king of this world. If I was the king of this world, then my people would rise up, but they're not, because I am not a king of this world." And he says, and then Jesus says, "Everyone who is of the truth hears my voice." And Pilate says to him, "What is truth?" Oh man, there's a whole lesson there. There's a whole lesson there. What is truth? Well, we all understand there's a right and wrong, and there's facts and there's not facts. But even in our own society today, people are talking about, well, my truth and your truth and that truth. And no, there's really only one truth. But Pilate has already been kind of jaded by his life in politics. And he's like, well, what is truth? What can you rely on as being real and truthful? Kind of tells you about how he is come to view things in life. Now, I'll tell you, I have it on a later slide. Pilate's already an old guy. I'm sorry to say old guy because I'm probably dating myself, but he's already in his 70s. And in that day and age, living in your 70s is a pretty good feat. So he's in his 70s, and he is in Judea, ruling Judea. And we'll get to that in a minute. But he takes Jesus out and he says, "I find no guilt in him." Now he's going to go to Herod, and then he's going to come back to Pilate. And I bring out that verse. "I find no guilt in him." But then he took and beat him anyway, had him scourged. He's not guilty of anything, but let's go beat him anyway. Let's go take him to the point of death anyway. What kind of cold, heartless person does that? And someone said, well, if he just beat him a whole lot, then the Jews would be pacified and they wouldn't want to have him killed. I don't know if I buy that. I think that he valued human life very little and didn't care about Jesus and what happened to Jesus. So when the chief priests and officers saw them, they said to him, "Crucify him, crucify him." I know I'm skipping a little bit, but I want to point this out. Crucify him, crucify him. Okay. If you go look in the law of Moses, how do people get executed? They get stoned, or they get put to death by the sword. Like they chop off your head. Neither is an excellent way to die, but neither one of them are like horrible torture designed to inflict the most pain possible. You can't find this in the old law, but the chief priests hated him so badly that they wanted him executed by a form of execution that they themselves weren't even willing to do. That's like, well, I really want you dead, but I could never bring myself to brutally murder you and torture you in such an awful way. So I'll have him do it instead. Does that make it any better? The hypocrisy there, that these guys were like, well, we want to have the Romans do it because they'll murder him in an awful and horrible, painful way. I just find that sad. In the midst of this, Pilate's questioning him again, and he says, "Where are you from?" And Jesus doesn't answer him, and that makes me think of Isaiah chapter 53, where he says, "He was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. Like a lamb that is led to the slaughter, like a sheep that is silent before his shearers, so he did not open his mouth." Now, of course, Jesus did have conversations during this time, but he didn't fight back. That's what he's saying here. Way back in Isaiah, thousands of years earlier, over 1,000 years earlier, it was prophesied that Jesus wouldn't fight back against being crucified. So who is this guy Pilate? Because there's a lot of people make a lot of things up and say a lot of things about Pilate. So he was the governor of Judea from about 26 until about 36. So he's going to serve as a governor even a few years after Jesus is put to death. So the Roman governor was in complete control of everything. He could even print money. He could print money even. He was the governor, he was commander of the garrison. He had control over the judicial system. So if there was a judicial matter that rose to the level of the Supreme Court, he was the Supreme Court. He had the power to collect taxes. He had the power to do all this stuff. And basically, as long as he kept the tax money that he was supposed to collect going to Rome, he could do whatever he wanted. He had complete control. Now, he reported to the governor of Syria. There was a Roman governor in Syria that had a more prestigious role, that was his direct boss. But unless he did something that really something really bad had to happen for him to get in trouble for anything he did. And when this happened, there was no governor in Syria. So really, the only person he reported to was the emperor. But this wasn't a prime assignment. The Jews were hard to manage. The place was not a nice place. They did not want to be there. It's kind of like if you're made the president, but you're made the president of, I don't know, Antarctica. It's like, well, you're the president, but you're the president of not a nice place. It's hard to manage, and everybody hates you. It would have been much better. He'd have loved to have been like the governor of France, or the governor of some Mediterranean island where it was nice, or Asia Minor where it's beautiful, lush, and green. He would have loved to have been a governor in Spain. Think of all the nice places in Spain. But no, he was in Judea. He didn't. This wasn't an awesome position. But he also knew that there was no place for him to go up from here. This was like the end of the road for him, his final assignment, being already in his 70s. Luke records that he'd already desecrated a bunch of Galileans that he had murdered. So he wasn't like a nice guy. And later on, in a few years, there's gonna be a group of Samaritans that are trying to find some relics from Moses, and he has them all murdered. Killed, but just because you're the governor and you have somebody executed doesn't mean it's a good thing. He had all these people murdered. And so the Jews complained that he was overly cruel and had murdered all these people. So the guy in Syria is like, well, why don't you go see the emperor and see what the emperor wants to do? And the emperor's like, well, you don't have to go back there. He didn't have to return to Judea, and we don't know anything else about Pilate. Why am I spending so much time on this? Well, it's because people say, well, was Pilate to blame? Was Pilate to blame for Jesus's death? Well, he had the power to let Jesus go. He had the power to protect Jesus. We're going to find later on the guy that replaces him, or one of the guys later on, when Paul is arrested, the guy protects Paul. The Roman governor protects Paul. So Pilate, this guy, could have protected Jesus. He could have saved him, but he was more interested in preserving his relationship with the Jews. He'd rather kill an innocent man than to lose his relationship with the Jews, and the Jews complained. He didn't want anybody getting back. We've already shown that history's recorded that this guy wasn't a nice guy. It wasn't like he was like a friend to the people. He wasn't. So I want to point out, just because he reluctantly murdered Jesus doesn't change the fact that he was the guy who said, execute him. Now, Matthew tells us that Pilate was like, well, I'll just read verse 24. When Pilate saw that he was accomplishing nothing, but rather that a riot was starting, he took water and washed his hands in front of the crowd, saying, I am innocent of this man's blood. See to this yourself. If I say I'm innocent of your blood and then I go ahead and sign your death warrant, you're not innocent. Just because he said he was innocent, he had the power to stop this, and he didn't. That's how much he valued the life of Christ. He would rather have Christ killed. He would rather have Christ killed than mess up his thing that he had going on there. That's pretty insensitive. I'll say it one more time. Just because he reluctantly murdered Jesus doesn't change the fact that he murdered Jesus. So some people say, well, Pilate was reluctant. He was remorseful from all this. Did he repent? Well, certainly he could have. He could have repented. but we have no evidence that that ever happened. And remember, all four of the Gospels are written after this. And wouldn't it be a big deal if all four of the Gospels were written and Pilate had repented? Wouldn't one of those Gospel writers have said something like, oh, and by the way, Pilate is now an elder in the church, or Pilate leads singing, Pilate's a great guy and he's changed his life? No, it doesn't say that. Now, some Ethiopian traditions, so that's kind of not North Africa, but just south of Egypt. Some of the Christians there believe that he repented. But Eusebius, and I kind of listened to Eusebius, says that when he got removed from office and went back to Rome, he committed suicide rather than face the possibility of punishment for his actions in Judea. I don't think he did. It's possible, but I don't think he did. So now we get to the crucifixion. I'm sorry, what I would like to do is I want to highlight a few things that maybe that we're not generally aware of. I think we're generally aware of what happened. They took Jesus, therefore, and he went out bearing his own cross to the place called the place of the skull, which is called in Hebrew Golgotha. Okay, we know this, but you're like, where's Golgotha? How far was it? What did this look like? Well, it's hard to say because all of Jerusalem was just totally destroyed. And they rebuilt stuff close to the way it was, but not really. If you go to Jerusalem today, you're going to see this place called the Way of Suffering, or the Via Dolorosa, where they actually have signs and they say this is the road that Jesus took. Well, we don't know for sure, but that path is about half a mile. So I got a map here. So most people think, okay, well, we know where the temple is. There was a big fortress right next to the temple, and that was on purpose so that the people in the fortress could look into the temple and see what was going on. And a lot of people think that's where Pilate's Jerusalem residence would be. Pilate spent most of his time over on the coast in Caesarea in his nice villa on the coast where it would have been cooler in the summers, but he had to come to Jerusalem for the festival. So most people think that's where the trial took place, and then he comes down this road and goes out here and goes right outside the city gate to Golgotha. Now in the video, it looks like they're out in the wilderness, and of course that's because the people that are making the video probably couldn't afford sets to build all of a set of Jerusalem. So it looks like Golgotha is in the middle of nowhere. What it really was right outside the city gates at that time. And so all around the city would have been like suburbs. It wasn't desolate. It was suburbs. We see there's a Garden of Gethsemane. There's these rivers and the olive orchards and all this stuff surrounding the city walls. And the Golgotha is believed to be this place right outside the city near a gate, so everybody who walked by could see these crucifixions. Here's a map. Now, the people have stitched together all the gospel accounts and added a few extra things that aren't in the gospel. So if you want to go do this walk, you start here and you go down, and in each place there's a sign and says this is where such and such happened. And station 6 is Veronica wipes Jesus's face, and I'm like, I don't know who Veronica is. That's not in the Bible, but she's got a place here on the Villa Dolorosa. Here's some pictures of what the place looks like today. This picture here is like 100 years old, and you can look at a modern picture and it looks about the same. It would have been narrow streets between people's houses and businesses in Jerusalem until they got to the gate. And of course, people today take crosses and walk this half a mile or so carrying a cross. I thought about getting into, well, what would the cross look like and all of that, and I would just be making it up because we have no idea what the cross looked like. All we know, it was tall enough that a guy had to put a sponge on a stick to reach Jesus, so it had to have been high enough to do that. But we don't really know what the cross looked like. A lot of times you see these pictures of Jesus on the cross, and there's a sign above it, and it says IRNA. Well, that's not what was there. What was actually there was Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews, and it was written in Hebrew, Latin, and Greek. So that's what that would look like. There's the Hebrew, there's the Greek, and I believe that's the Latin there. I'm pointing on the screen so y'all online won't see if I'm pointing to the wrong one. So that's what would have been written and put above his head. Most of the time, such an elaborate thing wouldn't have been put above there. Maybe there would have been a sign that said traitor or murderer or cheated on taxes or something. I don't know. But this was elaborate. And of course, the Jews didn't like this. They said, hey, he said he was the king of the Jews. He wasn't actually the king of the Jews. And you should be executing him because he said that. And Pilate, kind of a dig at them, says, I wrote what I wrote. And then we get to this point where the soldiers, okay, so in the video, we always see Jesus is wearing like a little garment. Jesus would have been naked. They would have stripped him down, and they are going to take all of his belongings and keep them. The fact is, a piece of cloth had value. It wasn't like we donate stuff. A piece of cloth is like handmade or whatever. The Roman soldiers would have taken all that stuff and sold it or used it, probably sold it for what little value it had. But they come to his tunic, and his tunic was woven. It was like somebody had knitted his tunic in all in one piece, so it didn't have any seams on it, so they couldn't just like rip it at the seams. So like, hey, this has got more value as one piece than it would if we tore it into pieces. So why don't we cast lots or roll dice to see who gets it? These four soldiers that are guarding Jesus out there. And so they did that, and they cast lots. And one of them got the prize of his woven tunic that probably had some value that they could go sell. And it says, they divided my outer garments among them. I find this fascinating that if you go look at Psalm 22, how much of Psalm 22 is prophetic. We're going to read the first half of Psalm 22 here, written by David almost 2,000 years before Jesus, 15 or 1,600 years at least, before Jesus. And he writes this. And I've highlighted some of the things that we've read about in our sermon and our class this morning that are fulfilled by this. My God, why have you forsaken me? Jesus actually said that on the cross. Far from my deliverance are the words of my groaning. O my God, I cry by day, but you do not answer, and by night, but I have no rest. Yet you are holy, O you who are enthroned upon the praises of Israel. In you our fathers trusted. They trusted and you delivered them. To you they cried out and were delivered. In you they trusted and were not disappointed. But I am a worm and not a man, a reproach of men and despised by the people. And we've seen how Jesus was despised. All who see me stare at me. They separate with the lip. They wag their heads, saying, commit yourself to the Lord. Let him deliver him. Let him rescue him, because he delights in him. Yet you are he who brought me forth from the womb. You made me trust when upon my mother's breast. We hear from the other Gospels that one of the thieves on the cross next to Jesus said, hey, why don't you save us and yourself? Fulfilling this prophecy right here. Moving on to verse 10. Upon you I was cast from birth, yet you have been my God from my mother's womb. Be not far from me, for trouble is near, for there is none to help. Many bulls have surrounded me, strong bulls of Bashan have encircled me. They open wide their mouth at me, as ravening and roaring lions. I am poured out like water, and all my bones are out of joint. My heart is like wax, it is melted within me. My strength is dried up like a potsherd, and my tongue cleaves to my jaws. And you lay me in the dust of death, for dogs have surrounded me. A band of evildoers has encompassed me. They pierce my hands and my feet. I can count all my bones. They look, they stare at me. They divided my garments among them, and for my clothing they cast lots. Jesus said, I am thirsty, because of course they weren't giving him 3 meals a day as they were dragging him out to execute him. My tongue cleaves to my jaws. He's thirsty. I'm poured out like water. What happened when he was stabbed in the side? Water and blood came out. I can count all my bones. And as we'll get to next week, they didn't break Jesus's bones. They pierced my hands and my feet. They divided my garments among them. All things that we talked about were fulfilled prophecy in Jesus. One of the last things we'll cover here, I know I'm getting a little bit wordy, but standing at the cross, of Jesus were his mother and his mother's sister, Mary the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. When Jesus then saw his mother and the disciple whom he loved standing nearby, he said to his mother, Woman, behold your son. Then he said to the disciple, Behold your mother. And from that hour the disciple took her into his own house. We don't know why this happened. We know that Jesus had brothers and sisters, and Jude and James wrote books of the Bible, and they were his brothers, and they were faithful Christians. Some suppose since John was known by the high priest, his family must have been rich or something, and Jesus was in a better, John was in a better place to take care of them. It could also be, and a lot of people believe that Joseph, Mary and Joseph had passed away already. We don't know. We just don't know. Some people believe that Mary moved to Ephesus with John because John moved to Ephesus and is later going to write the 3 books of John, and he's going to write Revelation from the island right off the coast of Ephesus. And others believe that she died before John moved to Ephesus. We just don't know. But we do know that Jesus asked John to take care of his mother. And then we've already talked about that he said he was thirsty, and then he received that sour wine on a sponge, and he said, It is finished. And he bowed his head and gave up his spirit. And that's what we're going to cover this morning. We'll try to finish the book of John next time I'm here. I was really this was overwhelming to me to go through this and read this 5 or 6 times and watch the video over and over and research all these things and to come to the conclusion that these people went out of their way to be cruel, to murder Jesus. And each of us in our own way have done things in our lives. We have sinned such that sacrifice was necessary. So we can all be thankful that Jesus was willing to do this at the hands of cruel, cruel men so that we could have our sins atoned for. So at this congregation, we have a tradition where we stand at the ready as we say a final song, so that if you would like to take on Christ and become a Christian, we give you that opportunity. But also, if you would like the prayers of this congregation, if you would like the prayers of the saints here, we ask that you come forward as we stand and sing this final song of the invitation. Stand with me now, please.